Hey everyone, John from Nintendo Life here, and today we're reviewing Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne HD for Nintendo Switch. This review was originally written by Mitch Vogel and was adapted to video by me. Anyway, let's get started. By this point in time, it would be relatively easy to believe that Persona was Atlus's flagship franchise. In actuality, Persona itself is a spin-off of Shin Megami Tensei, Atlus's true flagship franchise, which has been around for a lot longer. It remains to be seen whether Shin Megami Tensei 5 will finally be the entry to bring this parent franchise out of the spin-off shadow, but in the meantime, Atlus figured that now is as good of a time as any to bring back Shin Megami Tensei 3 for a new generation. Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne HD Remaster is exactly what it sounds like, a prettied up and a slightly modified take on an oft-forgotten 6th generation RPG classic. Sometimes that feels like a good thing, and sometimes it doesn't. Shin Megami Tensei 3 hasn't aged as gracefully as some may have hoped, but it's also quite easy to see that this has all the elements of a great RPG. The unique mixture of a dark atmosphere, heavy religious themes, and punishing difficulty is simply unlike anything else out there, and it's the sort of thing that can become quite enchanting once it hits its stride. SMT3 is not a feel-good game by any means. The whole thing plays like a bad ending of a JRPG. Your character has the privilege of watching the apocalypse happen in a terrifying cosmic event called the Conception, and then he's transformed into a demon-human hybrid when Satan himself forces him to eat a worm. And that's just the first hour. From there, you wander the resulting wasteland with a harem of demons in tow. These help you face off other demons who now roam free and bask in the chaos of this awful new hellscape. But there is a modicum of hope. The new world is technically not destined to stay ruined. Instead, it's more like the world is trapped in a limbo state, and what the new world is destined to be is ultimately decided by your actions. This is where a great deal of the philosophy of Shin Megami Tensei 3 comes in, as nearly all of the important NPCs you interact with each represent a different school of thought, none of which are more right or wrong than the others. Ruminations on the importance of control and freedom in the lives of sentient beings are part of the course here, and while it's not exactly an exhaustive lesson on the nuances of, say, the deontological versus the consequential ethics debate, the narrative nonetheless feels a little more highbrow than the standard save the world from evil song and dance that many JRPGs roll with. After all, there's not really a world to save. This focus on high-concept ideas is interesting in its own way, but it seems that it comes at the cost of an actual plot. Your journey is a lonely and meandering one, and what little character development exists in this story only occurs in the various supporting characters who come off as barely more than walking ideologies. There's not much in the way of meaningful or emotional interaction between characters, and though everyone but you has a goal, these parallel subplots never culminate in something that makes you think about the world or its inhabitants. In this regard, the narrative of Shin Megami Tensei 3 could absolutely be described as interesting, but it would be a stretch to call it gripping. As you wander between locales in search of the next plot device or person needed to move things forward, gameplay plays out much akin to a standard dungeon-crawling JRPG. There's an overworld which serves to connect the various dungeons and towns together, and you bounce from one place to the next as the story dictates. Combat is a real highlight. It may seem like a standard turn-based battle system, but it's really polished. Each party member gets one turn per round, but if anyone lands a critical or finds the enemy's weakness, one more turn gets added to the party's bank. This means if you're smart, you can potentially double your party's output. This pushes you to build your ideal team around elemental weaknesses, and that's especially true given that enemies also hit your weaknesses. So this leads to a very simple battle system, but one with a ton of depth. And of course, Megami Tensei predated Pokemon, and the idea of recruiting monsters came from that series way back in the 80s. Almost all the enemies you fight can be recruited by you with a little persuasion. Towards the end of most random battles, you can talk to the last surviving demon. This initializes a negotiation session that ideally results in them joining your party, but most of the time it ends in them telling you to get bent as they run off with all the money they swindled out of you. To say that demon negotiation is frustrating in Shin Megami Tensei 3 is a massive understatement. It's a critical part of the game, but there's almost no telling what it takes for a demon to actually join you. Sometimes the demons want you to agree with them, other times they don't. You basically just have to hope that random chance is on your side. Demon negotiation is certainly fun in theory, but this is one area where Shin Megami Tensei 3 feels quite dated, especially compared to the more refined take on the concept from later games. Alongside using diplomacy to fill out your ranks, you also have the option of using a demon fusion to keep your party in fighting shape. Using this, you can take 2 or more demons in your stock and combine them into a more powerful demon that carries some of their skills. And luckily, with this re-release, Atlus has changed the rules a little bit. You can now directly choose some of the skills the demon inherits. This may seem like a small change, but it takes a lot of the guesswork and randomness out of the process. It's just a more streamlined and enjoyable take now. As for the main character himself, his progress is tied to the job system that dictates which skills he'll end up learning. Only one can be equipped at a time, and each one alters the stats and elemental weaknesses in different ways. You can get these items at shops or from beating boss battles, and each one changes the strategy drastically, especially as the demons get tougher. There isn't much in the way of new content being brought to this HD re-release, with the bulk of changes being mostly small additions to smooth out the more dated aspects. Aside the retooling of skill inheritance, the most notable new feature is the inclusion of a new easy mode. This does come as DLC, but it's free DLC. Here you dish out a lot more damage and take less. You also earn 3 times the amount of experience and money after each fight. Now, the savage difficulty of the normal mode is very much part of the charm, but if you want something more in line with other RPGs, then this is far more merciful. Aside from that, certain characters now have full voice acting. You can also suspend and save at any time. Those of you looking for a remake then may be a little disappointed, as this is pretty much the original game with a few bells and whistles. And one area that feels like a noticeable letdown is the music. Some tracks aren't too bad, but recurring tracks like the main battle theme sound like they're being played under a blanket, in another room. Considering the soundtrack received a remaster some time ago, it flat out doesn't make any sense that Atlus wouldn't deem it worthy to use those tracks. It's not a game-breaking shortcoming by any means, but this is so weird and easily fixed. It needlessly makes this remaster uneven. From a graphical perspective, Shin Megami Tensei 3 certainly looks better than it ever has. But there's also no mistaking that this game came out 18 years ago. Janky animations, lifeless models, low-quality textures, and unimpressive effects are all over the place, and many of the FMV sequences maintain their original SD resolution and aspect ratio. To be fair, this was never pitched as a remake, so there's only so much we can reasonably expect, but it's something to keep in mind. There's plenty of content for those looking for a bang for their buck, as the full experience is found in several replays. There's different endings depending on who your character chooses to back and how they do so, and each standard playthrough takes you around 60 to 70 hours to clear. It may seem a bit much to play through the game 6 or more times, but even just one playthrough feels packed with enough variety to be worth your time. We feel that it's important to highlight that, at least at launch, the asking price for Shin Megami Tensei 3 HD Remaster feels a little high considering what's on offer here. As we mentioned before, there are some new additions, but this is pretty much the original game repackaged for a new generation. There's nothing wrong with that, of course, but it's being priced as if it's something more. Now, having the option to play Shin Megami Tensei 3 on the go isn't something to be dismissed, but we'd very much encourage that you think hard about whether this aligns with your interests. If you've got a PlayStation 3, then the original version is just $10 for mostly the exact same experience. Shin Megami Tensei 3 HD Remaster is indisputably the best way to play this RPG classic, but it's also rather clear that this nearly 2-decade-old game is showing its age. An interesting story, enjoyable combat, and engaging demon recruitment systems make Shin Megami Tensei 3 worth your time, but the dated visuals, poor quality music, and occasional unforgiving mechanics hold it back from being excellent. We'd give this a recommendation to both longtime fans and newcomers, but with the caveat that you should probably wait for a sale. We here at Nintendo Life give Shin Megami Tensei 3 HD Remaster a 7 out of 10. Thank you so much for watching, and for a lot more Switch reviews, check out nintendolife.com. But until then, go to that subscribe button and negotiate with it for a while, and it'll take all your money and your health potions, but eventually it may join you, and we'll see you next time. Bye everyone.